Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Hello, Dr. Smith.
Hello, hello. Thank you for taking the time to jump on this evening. I am going to record this just because I know that there will probably be some families who have questions who are unable to join this evening. So I just want to spend a little bit of time talking about the high school choice process. Oh, and we've got some more families joining now, so I'll let them in. Yeah, so I just wanted to spend some time this evening talking about the high school choice process and give you a chance to ask some questions. I've been working on the other end of high school choice for quite some time at the high school level, and so I'm pretty familiar with how things work. And I want to give families an opportunity to learn a little bit more about this next step that we'll be taking. So, again, thank you all for joining this evening. I'm going to go ahead and get started, and then as people join in, we will welcome them and fill them in on anything they might have missed. So, just a quick overview of what high school choice is. So school choice is how students in grade 8 in Baltimore are assigned to high school. I'm a Baltimore City school graduate, and back when I was in high school or middle school going to high school, there was no choice process in this sense. There were sort of neighborhood schools and there were magnet schools. And so if you didn't qualify for your magnet program, then you went to the school in your neighborhood. We used to call them zone schools. There aren't zone schools anymore. So even if there is a school in your neighborhood, it does not necessarily mean that you will automatically go to that school. You are guaranteed a placement in Baltimore City Public Schools, but you have to select and rank them according to your interests and according to your academic profile. So all eighth grade students participate in the choice process. Again, it used to be that just students who wanted to do the elite programs or the magnet programs, I should say, had to participate in choice. That is no longer the case. You should also know that students from outside of Baltimore City also vie for seats in Baltimore City, particularly at the magnet high schools. So City Poly, um, School for the Arts, Dunbar, and Western, right, are the citywide schools. And so there are students from Baltimore County, there are students who are coming from private schools who are also competing for those seats. And so I shared that with the students when I met with them last week, just so they understand and so everyone understands that it is a competitive process when we're talking about some of the magnet programs, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. And just forgive me, I'm letting a few more people in to join us.
Dr. Smith, do you want to make me co-host so I can let people in for you?
Yeah, that'd be great, Mr. Gordon. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that for it now.
Okay.
Yeah. You should have access to that now, Mr. Gordon. Thank you. All right, so what's new with choice this year? So they've modified choice a few different ways based on the new COVID world that we live in. So a couple of things. One, as it says here, bullet point one, a geographic placement preference will apply to traditional high schools. So as I mentioned, there aren't necessarily zone schools. You don't necessarily automatically get to go to the school in your neighborhood. However, they will put more weight on students coming from a particular neighborhood to go to a school in their neighborhood if it is a traditional high school, right? Again, that does not apply to the citywides, right? So that does not apply to, and we'll talk about the criteria to get into the citywides in a second. CTE, which are the career and technology schools, are no longer have a minimum composite score requirement to get into those schools. So it used to be that Carver, Edmondson, and Mervo had a minimum composite score. I think it was 500 or 510 that you needed. Excuse me, my phone fell. That you needed to have in order to get into those schools. So that is no longer the case. Students still need to apply to those programs, but they don't have to have a minimum score to get into those programs. which means that it's going to open the door for more students to apply to get into. I know sometimes we have students who are interested in cosmetology, some students who are interested in HVAC work, some students who might be interested in becoming an auto mechanic, right? So different schools like Emerson and Carver and Merville offer different trade programs. And so those are no longer entrance criteria. You don't have to have a minimum score. In addition to selecting schools in the high school choice application, there will be a survey for student interest in CTE programming, right? So, so specifically, they'll try to match students to their career field interest if you're interested in attending a CTE school or a trade school, if you will, right? So if your young person has has an inkling for culinary arts, right, then they might choose the culinary program at Mervo, right? And they, I think Merville has like a partnership with Noisy Burger, which is at our house, and they do stuff out on campus, but you can also work at our house, which is pretty cool. And the last thing here is that the school choice fair, which pre-COVID, we would have the school choice fair at the Baltimore Convention Center that first Saturday in December. All the schools would show up. You could meet representatives, talk to students. Obviously, just trying to be safe in the world that we live in right now, everything is virtual. So schools have pre-recorded messages that highlight what's happening in their schools. And so that will become live. That will be live on the city schools website beginning December 3rd, and it'll last through December, right? So you can, Mount Washington, I've recorded one for Mount Washington for those students who are looking for a middle school, but all the high schools will have videos as well, and you'll be able to learn more about the schools. They'll have contact information and just general information about what makes their school stand out as opposed to another school, right? So that goes live again on December 3rd. What else is new with choice? So you've probably heard a lot about composite scores. I'll talk a little bit more about it in a second, but they've changed the formula to create the composite score for students. So everything in high school choice comes down to the student's composite score number if they're interested in a citywide school, a magnet school, what they're calling now an entrance criteria high school, right? So if your young person is interested again in City Poly, Western, Dunbar, BSA, they have to meet the minimum composite score. That formula has changed. So I'll talk about that in the gray box, right? So the fall 2021, beginning of year MCAP assessment scores will be used as part of the composite score. In years past, they've used iReady scores. And they've told us on the admissions end that if the MCAP scores aren't ready, then they would revert to iReady scores. But it looks like everything that I've heard, we've gotten early MCAP scores back already. So it looks like MCAP scores will be the standardized test part of the composite score formula, right? The other thing that I really, really like is that they've taken a little bit of the SAT sort of model of the highest, your highest average score, if you will, into the model here. So that yellow box at the bottom says to calculate your final grade average, we will look at students' final grades for 6th and 7th grade. The highest overall grade average will be used. We will look at your best grades, and those will be the grades used for your composite score, which is great, right? Because that means they're taking into account last year when we know that some students really struggled in the virtual world and their 7th grade grades might not be a true reflection of their academic capability. So they're saying, okay, if your 7th grade grades weren't great, pandemic induced, right, then we're going to look at your 6th grade scores. And if the 6th grade end of year scores were higher, then we're going to take that average and put it into the calculator, right? As opposed to your 7th grade scores. If your 7th grade, maybe some of your students did a fantastic job in virtual, right? I had some students at the high school level who excelled in the virtual world. If that is the case, then they will take your 7th grade grade. So whichever is higher of the two will be the grades that go into the calculation. And that, again, that's very new, right? It used to be just your 7th grade grades, first quarter of 8th grade, standardized test scores, that's your composite score. But now they're going to give some favorable um, advantages to students, understanding that, again, last year was a challenge for many of our students, many of our young people. So I do appreciate that. And I'll share more about that if, more as more information comes to me. Right. So it's just some things that again, I've shared this presentation with students so they're aware, but I want parents to be aware as well. What are some things to consider when choosing a high school? Right. So things to think about are academic and career programming. Right. Is your young person pretty sure that they want to pursue a college pathway? Well, there are some schools that will set students up for that pathway more successfully, maybe, than some other schools might. Or career programming, same thing, CTE, right? Or do you have a young person who has some idea of whether he or she or they are interested in a particular career path? Well, that might exist at a high school. They can get a head start on that by joining the CTE program at a particular high school. So having that conversation with your young person is something to start with. Extracurricular activities, right? At the high school level, many schools offer a wide range of extracurricular activities, whether it's sports, whether it's robotics, whether it's debate, um, foreign language clubs, sign language clubs, environmental programs. I mean, if you name it, these schools pretty much have it. So if there is something that your young person is passionate about in an extracurricular sense, then you might want to think about it one particular school over another. Friends and family, right? Understanding that maybe your family has a particular legacy at a particular school, and you want that student to experience that same environment. Maybe there is a friend group who, they've matriculated through most of K-8 together and they want to continue to experience that educational journey together. So maybe that's something that influences. Maybe it's a carpool situation, right? Where the majority of kids in your neighborhood, in your community, are interested in going to a particular school. It's, everyone, the family groups will work together to get students there. That's something to think about as well. So thinking about location in that sense. And then, of course, entrance qualifications, right? Does your student have the ability academically to get into a particular school? And we'll talk about some of the nuances there. But we want to set all of our young people up for success, right? So we want to help them find a school that they will feel comfortable and happy and healthy at. That will help them to pursue their goals after high school, whether that be collegiately or professionally. And so having that conversation now is super important. So thinking about some of the programs that are offered at some of the different schools, I mentioned some of this already, so forgive me if it's a little repetitive, but some special academic programming. So the 3DE is new to me. It's a partnership that exists at the Frederick Douglass High School in West Baltimore, where they do some career preparation, but also some college preparation in there as well. So that was a little bit less familiar to me than some of the others. Thinking about advanced academic programming such as International Baccalaureate, which of course Mount Washington is. Thinking about advanced placement classes, which many high schools offer. Some offer a lot more options there than others do. So that's something to think about. Thinking about the Ingenuity Project, which is offered over at the high school level, offered over at the Polytechnic. P-Tech for those who are interested in the healthcare fields. I know that Dunbar has a really strong P-Tech program for those young people who might be interested in a nursing or medical career field. JROTC, so several different schools offer JROTC, which is a great way to get scholarship money for college, if that's something that your young person is thinking about, that you as a family are thinking about already down the road. So that's something to think about as well. I know that, again, Polytechnic has a JROTC program, but some other schools do as well. Dual enrollment, right? So earning college credits while you're in high school. So Bard, for example, offers dual enrollment. But if you're taking IB classes at City or AP classes at Polytechnic, you can also earn college credits for those classes as well if your student does well enough on the exam. So all those things are factors to keep in mind as you're looking at schools and thinking about options. And on the CTE, and again, career and technical education, some of the things that are offered: computer science, healthcare, culinary arts, construction, cosmetology, automotive, and some schools offer some particular programs to their particular schools. So you'll research a little bit more to see what those schools offer. So again, there's a lot of choices. So, which is why it's great that we're starting now. We'll have an opportunity to spend some time throughout the month of December exploring different schools with your young people, and really sort of getting to what sort of speaks to them in their interests moving forward. This is a graphic from the district, thinking about the different options that are out there in terms of high school choice, right? So you have your entrance criteria schools, your P-Tech schools, your pathways and technology, early college, high schools, traditional middle high schools. For example, it's not really traditional, but Baltimore Design School is a 6 to 12 school, right? So they go from grades 6 to 12. Traditional high schools, 9 to 12. Charter schools, which we can talk about, have a little bit different process, right? They sometimes have their own unique application system. Many of them are also lottery based, right? So even if you meet the qualifying criteria to gain acceptance to that school, they sometimes have limited seat availability, which means that they go to a lottery. And we talked about CTE and the 3DE programs already. So I know that many of our families here at Mount Washington are interested in entrance criteria schools, right? That many of our students do very well academically, and that will set them up to go to some of the top performing high schools in the area. So entrance criteria schools are exactly what they say, right? You have to meet the minimum entrance criteria to even be able to apply, right? And so again, as many of you know, I'm coming from 16 years at City College, the last 5 of which I spent as the admissions director. So I was looking at this from the other end. And so it's important just to be open and honest about like how that process works. I've had many conversations with families over the years where, have very talented young people who don't meet that minimum score. And I've had Congress people, I've had local officials, city council people write letters. And if it's an entrance criteria school, as compelled as the admissions counselor might be at that school, everything gets back to the composite score. Everything gets back to the number that gets calculated by the formula that North Avenue uses. So recommendations don't play a role. Extracurriculars, unfortunately, don't really play a role. It really does all come down to the score. So for each of the schools listed here, City, Poly, Dunbar, Western, BSA is an entrance criteria school, but they have their own separate application process, which is why they aren't listed here. But for each of the schools listed on this screen, the minimum composite score is a 610. So a student has to have at least a 610 composite score to apply to any of these schools. I'll say the same thing to you that I said to the students last week. A 610 is only to apply, right? A 610, however, because there's so many talented students all around Baltimore City, and as I mentioned, coming from Baltimore County and coming from private schools means that there's limited seat availability, and it means that a 610 composite score, at least at City and Poly over the last 8 to 10 years, a 610 won't get you into the door, right? Just to be very honest. As a frame of reference, my last year at City, the lowest score that was accepted, and this is pre-COVID, was a 685. Sorry, let me be clear. So a 610 to apply, 685 was the lowest score that was accepted, right? Which means that We had students in the 640s, 660, 670, really strong composite scores. The lowest score that got in was 685, right? So, I say that not to scare families off from applying. I know that many of our students will have those scores and above, but I do want to be very realistic with families about knowing what your options are and having a broad sense of the different possibilities for your young person. That it's not just city or poly to go to, but that there are lots of really up and coming high schools in the area that have lots to offer. And so I want to expose students to as many of those things as possible. Um, so I'll keep going for time, and then I'll make sure that I leave some time for questions. So composite scores, I mentioned this already. Typically, and I guess it says typically here, final grades from 7th grade, first quarter 8th grade, MCAP scores, and for traditionally they had used attendance percentage for not for the city-wise, not for City Poly Western, but for the other schools that had criteria. They would use attendance percentages to rank students for acceptance into places like Mervo or Carver and other schools like that. That is no longer the case. They've gotten rid of the attendance qualification for all of the schools. So you should also know that because students are so talented and scores can be so high, that they have to rank students, right? And so it's sort of highest score, the higher your score, the better chances you have of actually getting into the school that you want to get into, right? So the highest composite score you can have is an 800, and then they work their way down from 800 based on how students have ranked their schools, and we'll talk about ranking in a second. So every year there are students all across the district who have perfect composite scores. That doesn't mean that necessarily had perfect grades, although it usually means they had really, really strong grades, but it means that they scored in the 99th percentile in the MCAP, and then they mostly had A's for their scores in middle school, right? So that happens, right? Students from Mount Washington, students from Roland Park, students from Thomas Johnson. Every single year, there are students from all of the top performing middle schools that have those scores. And so if those students are interested in seats, though, they take those seats first, and then they go down the scoring until they run out of seats. Right. So that's how, for example, City ended up at 685 was the lowest score that got in, because when they got to 684, there were no seats left. Right. All the seats had been taken by students in the 700s and the really high 600s. By the time they got to 684, they were all gone. Right. So there is a ranking system that happens based on the student's composite score. All right, so this is the score, the formula for particular for this year. So your overall grade average, as I mentioned, 6th or 7th grade, whichever one is higher, combined with the first quarter of 8th grade, they'll average that out. And then your MCAP scores, your math test score and your reading test score go into a formula, and then it spits out a number, and that number becomes your composite score. So I'll be walking through the composite score, populating, if you will, with the students when we get back from Thanksgiving break, and into early December. We'll spend some time. I'll be meeting with students one-on-one to talk to them about their composite scores and where they are. But you'll also have an opportunity to go on as parents to Parent Portal and look and see what their composite scores are as well, so that you can have that conversation at home, and then which will inform our conversation that we have in school. Right. So how do we actually apply? So traditional high schools can be selected by listing them on the student's high school choice application. Students can list up to 5 schools, and an algorithm will assign students to a school. That algorithm has to do with rank and all those things, right? So certain charter schools may also be listed. Schools should be listed on the application in order of preference. Let me pause for a second and really emphasize that final point, right? Please, as you're filling out the application with your young person, please make sure that they are putting down schools in the order in which they most want to go to that school. I'll give you an example. It happens to me every single year, happened to me every single year when I was at the high school level, where I get an email from a child who had a 750 composite score, right? 750 is going to get you into any school that you want to go to, City Poly, Dunbar West, wherever you want to go. A 750 is a really strong score. You're going to get in. Right. And so I get an email that says, I had a really strong score. I don't understand how I ended up getting placed at Dunbar. I really wanted to go to City. And so we'll go and we'll look at the application, and they will have just put the schools in any order. And so whatever school was listed number one, the district takes that as that's the school you want to go to the most. Right. And so if you have the qualifying score to go to that school and there are seats available, they take you into that school. But what also happens is that once you get accepted into that school, your name gets taken out of the pool for the other schools. And the reason that happens is because Baltimore, the district needs to make sure that every student has a seat, right? So for example, we don't want Jimmy, if you will, fictional student at Mount Washington, who had a 750 composite score, to get accepted into 4 different schools and hold 4 different seats at those schools, right? He had a qualifying score to go to any of the schools, right? And so we don't want to hold those seats because those seats could go to other students, right? So whichever school he or she or they put first, if they have the qualifying score, that's the school that they're going to get into. If you put that school first, but your score is below the cutoff, then they're going to roll to your second choice and see if there's space at your second choice school. If there's space at your second choice school, then that's where you'll go. If they look at your second choice school and all the seats have been filled because the students had higher composite scores, then they go to your third choice school, and so on and so on and so on. Right? So how you rank your schools is super important, right? And there's just been, sometimes when young people are filling out the applications by themselves, they don't necessarily remember that part, or they just kind of put the schools down in alphabetical order sometimes, right? And so they make mistakes because they're 13 years old or 14 years old, and that happens, right? So working with them to make sure that they're putting down the school that they most want to go to is super important. This application that you're looking at right here is a paper copy that we're going to get at the school, but they've also made it so that there is an electronic version via parent portal, which we'll walk through in a second. So most of you hopefully are familiar with this screen. This is the Infinite Campus, or we refer to it as Parent Portal, for our parents to log in and keep track of their young people and how they're doing academically at our school. If you're unfamiliar with it, I hope that you'll get familiar with it very quickly so that you can use it to have open conversations with your young person about how they're doing. So in December, this portal will also add in the online choice application process. And so you'll be able to log in and be able to walk through the steps of having your young person apply to their schools. So here's what happens. So I'll go back for a second. You'll log in as you normally would. When you get in, you're going to select online choice application under the quick links tab. And forgive me that the picture's a little bit blurry, but there's a quick links tab going to be on the right hand side of your screen when you go in there. You're going to quick links, and then click on the online choice application. You will then find your young person's corresponding student card, right? And so you might be the parent of several young people in Baltimore City Public Schools. Of course, you're going to want to find your 8th grade student or students and click on their card. Once you've clicked on their card, you're going to come to your school choice folder, and then you'll be able to click the drop down menu and find the the schools that the student is most interested in. Same thing as a paper application, making sure that you rank them in the correct order. So what I'll do is go back through once we've completed the paper application is I'll go through and make sure that what's on the paper matches what's on the portal, right? Because we don't want to have mix-ups. And if there's a discrepancy there, then I'll have a conversation with you as slash your young person to make sure that we get the order the right way, right? So we'll cross check to make sure that we're all moving in the same direction. But that way, you will have access to where your student is applying as well, right? You'll also be able to find your young person's composite score by talking to me. I'm serving as the choice liaison this year. Our normal school counselor is out on leave, and so I had the experience to do this, and so I decided I would step in and support the school in this role as it's very familiar to me. So you will have an opportunity to speak with me, and also to go into the parent portal, the campus portal, to be able to see your young person's composite score. Again, that's not ready yet. We will start work on that when we get back from Thanksgiving break into early December. So I would say definitely by the second week of December, we'll be all set up and have everything in the portal so that you can check and see where we are. I'll also send some correspondence home via Blooms, but also I'll send a letter home with your young person to let you know that that everything is set up for you to be able to log in, and give you instructions again to be able to log in so that you have access to their composite schools. So timeline here, again, we're at the 8th grade stage, so we're on step 3, but hopefully you got a chance to do steps 1 and step 2 as well. So just thinking about talking to them about their grades and the importance of them. Right now, we're at stage 3, where we're learning about the application process for different schools that your young person might be interested in. And here is a timeline. This is super important, right? So between now and January, schools are opening up their virtual doors. Most of them are doing it virtually, but there are some schools who are hosting in-person events, and I'll share some of those with you in a second. Schools will host open houses and shadow days. Shadow days haven't really happened this year just because it's so hard with COVID to bring in another young person from another school into a high school and have to worry about spread and all those sorts of things. So it is disappointing. That was always one of my favorite things to do, was to host 8th graders for shadow day, to give them a real experience at the high school to see what it was like. But we do the best that we can in this virtual world that we're living in right now. Right. So November 30th, November 29th, I'm supposed to be receiving my choice guides and applications. And then on the 30th, between the 29th and the 30th, getting them and then start distributing them to the students. So fingers crossed that that timeline holds. As I mentioned, December 3rd is when the virtual school choice fair launches on the Baltimore City Public Schools website. I, of course, will blast that out again via Blooms to you all, so that you have that link and you can watch all the videos. They did the one last year, and it was actually a really cool experience to be able to learn about the different schools and hear from a lot of school leaders are on the videos talking about what happens, but also some young people talking about their experiences at the schools. Right. So between December 3rd, we have until January 21st is when the application is due. So we have some time, right? We have, about 6 to 8 weeks there really to do our due diligence, to really sit down with the young people, to have informed conversations, and to think about what school makes sense, what schools rather makes sense to apply to. Most charter school applications are due February 2nd. So that's a little bit after the school-wide Baltimore City Public School choice applications are due. It gives you a little bit more wiggle room if you're interested in a City Neighbors or a Bard or other schools like that. And then March is when decisions come out. right? And so that's always an exciting time as well. We'll do some sort of ceremony in the spring to celebrate all of our young people and be excited for whatever school it is that they choose to go to. But usually that's around early March is when students start to hear back from schools. Some schools might reach out earlier. Again, when I was at City, I would always reach out to my students late February because I wanted them to start thinking about if they were going to accept their seats. And that's something else to think about is that you'll have an opportunity to think about if you're applying to private schools and other schools. You'll also want to think about late February because that's when a lot of private school applications are due as well. And I know that many families at Mount Washington also consider the private school route for their young people. So a couple things that are coming up. I mentioned the choice fair, December 1st. And I just got this in my email today. The Office of Enrollment, Choice, and Transfer is hosting an information and Q&A for high school choice on Wednesday, December 1st from 4 to 5 p.m. I get that that's not the most convenient time, maybe, for families, but it's the time that they have available. And I'm sure they will also record it. So if you are interested in that, I will share the link to that. I'll put it in the chat when I close out the presentation tonight so that you can, I think it's going to be on Microsoft Teams. It's going to be a Teams meeting. So that is for families. And as I mentioned several times already, the virtual platform launches on December 3rd at noon. They often also have like live streams on Facebook and on the city schools website where they do some Q&A with families that day as well from the district office. So that'll be available for you as well. And they'll have more information about how to apply, resources, all those sorts of things. There's a QR code there for you to register. I'll also put the link to that in the chat when we conclude this as well. And then just some information about some upcoming open houses for some schools, right? So Green Street Academy, which is a charter school on the west side, they're really growing their program there. I've heard some really good things about them. December 15th, they have another virtual open house coming up from 5 to 6 p.m. Again, I'll record this. I'm recording this presentation, so I'll share it so that you all have it and you can access these links. So there's a QR code there as well if you want to snag that real quick. And Green Street is also one of those 6 to 12 schools. So they go from 6th grade to 12th grade. Bard Early College is another up and coming college preparatory high school, but they also do dual enrollment where students can earn an associate's degree during their junior and senior year by taking classes taught by actual Bard professors through the high school, right, which is really cool, right? So they've got some upcoming open houses on Thursday, December 16th. And January 6th, 7 p.m. And then they've got it in person. Oh, we missed the in-person one. I'm sorry. I got to see you a little bit late. I apologize for that. They had an in-person one just this past Saturday. But keep an eye out. Sometimes they will have other in-person events if things go well and if numbers stay pretty stable. This is for ACE. ACE is in the Hamden community. Another school, beautiful building, got renovated a couple years ago. It's the old Robert Poole Middle, but they've totally redone the building. It is absolutely gorgeous. We got some really strong teachers there. I know a few who are there, some really strong leadership there, really strong principal over there. And they've got a lot that they're trying to do in terms of extracurriculars, athletics, to keep kids engaged and involved at ACE. So they've got some open houses coming up. December 8th in person, there we go, at 4:30, and then a virtual one at 4:30 on December 13th, right? So you can use that QR code there if that's something that you're interested in joining as well. Again, I've heard good things about the work that they're doing at ACE. And Baltimore Design School, right? For those young people, Baltimore Design is really a unique school, as it says there. And students interested in architecture, graphic design, fashion, CTE programming. So really, really, and they're in an old warehouse that they've renovated and turned into a school. It's a really cool workspace. I got a chance to talk to some students there a couple years ago. Really, really cool facility that they have there. So they've got a unique application process because they are arts based. They like to see students complete a portfolio. They have some open houses coming up. So December 2nd from 5 to 6 via Zoom, and January 27th from 5 to 6. Sorry. Via Zoom, and then they also are having an in-person one. So February 5th from 10 to 11:30 a.m. So you get to check out the actual school building, which is exciting. And if you're not sure, I would encourage you to check it out just to get a feel for what the different schools offer, what they look like. That's so important to actually see the physical space so that your young person can have an idea of where they might be spending the next 4 years. And then, of course, I wouldn't, I couldn't go without giving a special shout out to City College just because of the unique connection that City has to Mount Washington, right? All of your young people are coming from an IB, MYP background, right? And so City is the premier IB high school in Baltimore, right? 98% college acceptance rate, and students going to the top colleges and universities around the country, and in some cases internationally as well, right? So City is doing a virtual, another virtual open house December 7th from 6 to 7:30. You can meet the principal, you'll meet the guidance counselor. We actually had City come in and talk to our students virtually last week, um, and it was a really good experience for our young people. And I know that many families on the call are always interested in Baltimore Polytechnic, right? So another great high school. Unfortunately, Poly, I reached out to them; they were unable to do articulation to come and speak to our students. They so they didn't have any availability. And both of their open houses have passed. They said they're not doing another one right now, but they have encouraged families to visit the Poly website to learn more about their programming. And the Ingenuity program, I should share for those who are interested, is a separate application, right? So we do have some poster information for the Ingenuity program. Their application is open through December 22nd. But all of that information is listed on the bpi.edu website, right? For those families who are interested in Poly, because I know that Mount Washington is pretty close. So I do want to do my due diligence and make sure that I let families know about what's happening there. I was disappointed that they weren't able to or willing to come in and speak to us, but I understand they've got a lot going on, and as most schools do. So I will offer them grace, and if you have questions particularly about Polytechnic, I would love to answer them. I have lots of friends who work there who would love to answer questions for you as well, if that is the case. So that is the end of my formal presentation. And so what I'd like to do at this time is to open the floor up for any questions that you might have. Also, I'm going to put in the chat here the registration, or the link rather, for the virtual fair. So that is in the chat there. And then the second link is a little bit long, I apologize, but it's the direct link. You're welcome. It's the direct link for the December 1st event. So let me type that in front of that. December 1st district Q&A. And this is a Microsoft Teams meeting. So I'm going to put that link. It's a long link. So I'll put that in the chat there. All right. So any questions, you're welcome to come off mute or put them in the chat. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
I have a
Correct.
question,
Yes,
Dr. Smith.
yes. So I see a question in the chat from Ms. Reeds. Applications are only for eighth graders. So if you have a seventh grader, this is great information for you in preparation for next year, but you can't officially apply until December of the eighth grade, actually January really, of the eighth grade year. Ms. Drummond-Gordon, go ahead.
Okay, so if a student, you said each student has 5 choices.
Up to 5. Yes, they don't have to do all 5. I have some students who will only do 2 or 3.
Okay, so for example, the students pick their 5 choices, but composite scores are very competitive for those 5 schools. Where will those students end up?
Great question. Happens every year. And so what ends up happening is that if a student doesn't get placed on any of those 5 schools, that actually the district does a second round of choice, and they will let the families know which schools are available at that time. And then the families can rank based on the new schools that are available. So the student will get placed at a school in the district, but we just can't guarantee which school it will be. Thank you. That's a great question, Ms. Drummond-Gordon. Ms. Reeds in the chat asked, can we still go to open houses? And yes, so you can go to open houses if you're 6th, 7th, or 8th grade. So open houses are literally that. They're open to any family who is interested. What if you really only want your kid to go to city? You have to put backups. Yes, please put backups just in case. Even if you know they've got that rock star composite score, they're knocking on that 800 door. Just to be safe, please put some other schools down, because if you only put one school down and for whatever reason you don't get in there, the district has to place that child at a school, right? And so what will end up happening is that that child they will roll until, because they don't have a place to put them, they will, so that second round of choice opens up, and then there will be even less choice in what place the student can go to. So please rank. I would say put at least 2 or 3. If they've got a really strong composite score, they're more than likely going to get into their top choice school, but you'd rather be safe than sorry. Great question. All right. What schools are most like city then, right? So city is unique, right? Just like Polytechnic is unique, right? Just cards on the table. I don't think I'm telling tales out of school here, but they're the strongest 2 schools, public schools in the district, and they compete nationally with some of the top high schools nationally. So they are the creme de la creme, if you will. But there are other strong schools, right? If you're looking for a school that is a little bit more liberal arts based, a little bit more project centered, a little bit more inquiry based, which are things that city tends to lean towards, then you might want to think of like a City Neighbors charter school. You might want to think of a BARD, right? Those schools tend to have a little bit more of the philosophy that aligns more to say. Not to say that Poly doesn't offer those things. Poly has, I know the social studies team at Poly very well. I know some ELA people there very well. They prepare students well in those categories as well. But we know that traditionally Polytechnic has been the STEM powerhouse, right? They are the science, tech, math. They're one of the top in the country, right? So that is their strength. This doesn't mean that they're weak in the other areas. And the same is true for City, right? I have kids every year who would come to City and are really strong math students, right? And City through IB has a really strong math program. Right, so it's not just one or the other. Each school offers lots of things that can provide balance for students. But we can talk more about which schools make sense for your particular child. Okay. Okay. Yep. And that happens. So we can again, Ms. Reese, we could talk in particular about particular concerns about a particular child and make a game plan for that. I would the district is working to make sure that there is equity in the choice process. But with the magnet schools, they are competitive, and so that's something that we need to. No, no, no. Yeah, questions are good. I appreciate them, and they are all questions that are relevant, and I'm sure benefit many families on the call. So, um, but yeah, so the district is working to make sure that it is an equitable process and that all students are represented and have a chance to attend the school that makes the most sense for them and their family. So that's something we can talk about. We can set up a time to talk in particular about what your child's grades are, what the needs are, and then make a game plan for any particular school that you might be interested in. Absolutely. Oh no, I'm happy. Yeah, yeah, I'm happy to do stuff like that. Yeah, that's a joy of mine. So yeah, love to meet families and talk about those things. Yeah, absolutely. Right. All right. So I want to thank you all for taking the time out on a Monday evening to join and to learn more about choice process. Again, I will share this recording hopefully within the next couple of days. I'll have it posted. I'll share it via Blooms, and you are welcome to share it with any of your friends and seventh and eighth grade families who might not have been able to make it on the call this evening. You'll be hearing more from me, right, as we gear up for choice. I'll start to be communicating a little bit more with families. So just be on the lookout for communication, and please do not hesitate to reach out. Big part of my job is making sure that all of our young people end up in spaces where they can be successful next year, right? So if you have questions, if you're unsure, if you have questions about a particular school, if you're not sure what makes sense to apply to based on your scores that come out, please reach out to me, and I would love to spend some time answering those questions for you, so that we can all have a happy spring and celebrate our young people as they move on to high school. All right. Have a good evening, everyone, and I will see you soon. And I should say, please be safe. Please get some rest. And I hope that you have a happy Thanksgiving, however you choose to celebrate it. All right. Take care, everyone. Have a good night.
Good night.
All
I will
right.
see you tomorrow, Dr. Smith.
See you, Mr. Owens Gordon.
Ready.
All righty.